All right, guys, 7 o'clock. All right. Well, is everybody having a good day? Well, I've been up since 11 last night, so I'm running on fumes, but we'll get through this, and I'm going to go home and crash. So, but it's good to see each one of you. We are obviously, I don't have a specific spot to take you to in the Bible tonight. We are going to obviously reference the Bible, but a lot of tonight is external Bible stuff. But we're doing it because we're setting a stage, because here in a few weeks, maybe next week, if I can get this figured out, we're going to have a science experiment in here, and it's going to get really cool, and you're going to start to realize that the world around you isn't quite what the world is around you. And so we're going to do all that. But we're going to set the stage for some things of that tonight. And so as I get my clicker going here, this has been our outline for years. We've added to it. And obviously we start in the center that Satan is the god of this world. And more than ever do we realize that he and his cronies are the prince and the power of the air, and that's who we go up against, that we're not going up against flesh and blood, but principalities and powers. And through those principalities and powers, these things are working together to work against us and work against the plan of God. And so tonight we're going to get into megaliths and monoliths, and we're going to talk about those things. And now we're talking about, this has been the sub-series under Corey Coffin in the Conspiracy, is the Bible and ancient technology. And so far, we've been talking about ancient technologies, but we've been talking about futuristic and present technologies. Because I believe, personally, that Ecclesiastes tells you that there's nothing new under the sun. All this new technology you think we're coming across, it's been around before, and it goes back to Genesis 6, and yet that's what we're going to kind of talk about tonight with ancient monoliths and megaliths. And guys, you guys got, this is obviously a picture of Stonehenge, but what we wanted to start with is unexplained engineering. And if you can understand, so a megalith is a site on the planet with multiple structures that are unexplainable. And then monolith would be a single structure around, and these things are literally tens of thousands of them around our planet. Okay, many of them can't be explained to this day. And let's start with Sacsayhuaman. Okay, and we'll get into that. It's down into South America, and if you'll notice, this is an aerial view of Sacsayhuaman, and I wanted to show you this because what we're going to focus on is some different stuff, but I want you to notice the circle and how all this stuff is laid out. Now, depending on who you listen to, you can listen to people that'll say, hey, this thing's 13,000 years old, and you'll have other people say, oh, no, it's 4,000. You'll have people say, no, it was 600 years before Christ. I don't know when, and I'm not here to solve all that. I'm just telling you the guys putting these things together understood some things that you and I don't understand today. Okay? This here being a side of the wall. So in other words, when we look at Sacsayhuaman, these stone walls, especially over in this area, is what you're seeing here. Now, obviously, these are 4 grown adults standing next to one of these rocks. And I want you to notice that the rocks, or the stones that are put together, are perfectly carved and fit together like a jigsaw puzzle. They have no mortar. It's a dry wall. In other words, you know, when you lay brick, and this is my only brick wall I've ever laid, but when you lay that brick, there's space that can be, you know, if one brick isn't fitting to the next just right, well, you got a layer of mortar in between it. That's not the case here. And I want you to notice that each stone, as it goes towards its crack, it's curving in. The other thing these walls do is they actually go in. So as we go back to the other picture, as they come up the elevation, they actually lean in. And if you know what an Allen wall is, you probably see these Allen walls all the time. Allen walls are these stone units that are put together, and they actually lean in so that when you fill them up with dirt, they don't push out. These guys were doing that long before we came up with it. All right. Now, understand, by looking at that, you can't fit a piece of paper in between those cracks. Now, remember, you've been taught that man was primitive and he worked with chisels and stone tools and hammers and did all this stuff, okay? I want you to just notice this one rock. Not only is it cut like a jigsaw to fit all this other, but notice the people here, okay? Now, here's some other pictures of the same outfit of Sacsayhuaman, and you'll notice the bigger stones down at the bottom. They get smaller as they go to work their way up. But look at the size of them. This is a grown person standing next to these stones. Now, laying on the northern outskirts of the city of Cusco in Peru lies the walled complex of Sacsayhuaman. The site is famed for its remarkable large dry stone walls with boulders carefully cut to fit together tightly without mortar. The stone used in the construction of the terrace at Sacsayhuaman weighs up to 200 tons. Okay? Now, to give you an understanding, a ton is about 2,000 pounds. So those of you that are driving these little cars out here, that's basically a ton. My truck that I drive is a 3/4 ton. We've had about 2,000 pounds, a ton of water literally sitting in the back of it. Okay? So that's to give you an idea what a ton is. A little car out here, this is 200 tons on certain one stone. Okay? 200 little of your little Corollas or whatever it is you rolled up in here with, all right? 200 of them making up one stone. And that one stone being carved, curved, set in place like a jigsaw. Imagine taking that on. How would you do that? Even if you said, that's fine, we'll get a crane in there. 200 tons per stone, and we'll get more onto the cranes. But then you got to shape it to fit all the stones around it. Then it's got to fit together. There is no mortar. Okay, how did they do this? No matter when you believe they were put together, we still to this day can't explain this. Now, going back, and are among the largest stones in any building in pre-Hispanic America and display the precision of fitting that is unmatched in the Americas. The stones are so closely spaced that a single piece of paper will not fit between many of the stones. This precision, combined with the rounded corners of the block and the variety of their interlocking shapes and the way that the wall leans inward, puzzles scientists for decades. According to the conventional science, neither the Incas nor the Mayans or any other pre-Columbian society had the wheel. Everyone marvels at the huge blocks used to build the pyramids of Egypt and the tight tolerance between them. The megalithic structures of Sacsayhuaman in Peru has equaled those tolerances with many huge multi-sided blocks which are all completely irregular in kind of three-dimensional jigsaw. So it's not that they just fit together in a flat surface, but they do that three-dimensionally into the wall, okay? Now, according to Graham Hancock, archaeologist, one of those stones is 29 feet high. So let me help you out. If you go out into the gym and you stand dead center and you look straight up, that's 28 feet to the peak. So you have a stone that if we set it inside of our gym would be 1 foot taller than the building. Now watch. It's 29 feet high and weighs more than 360 tons or 720,000 pounds. The equivalent of 500 passenger automobiles. The stone is not even at the base of the wall yet. In other words, that's not a stone on the ground. That's one they've elevated and put up into the wall. Any idea how they got it there? Well, hang on, trust me, we're going somewhere, all right? Now, yet they quarried it from which the granite blocks were cut out more than 10 miles away. So imagine this. Let's just imagine a stone out here in the gym that's 1 foot taller than the gym, and let's just say it's 30 feet by 30 feet. And you got to move that thing to Hiram. How do you do it? Like, we don't, to this day, have that capacity. And we think we're so technologically advanced. You can barely get in an election in one night, all right? Now, the method used to match precisely the shape of the stone with these adjacent stones has been the focus of much speculation and debate. Various theories put forward include stone softening using a mysterious liquid derived from plant material. So what you're telling me is we've got some plant out here we've ground up, and the fluid from this plant, we rub it all over the stone, it softens the stone, and now we're able to carve it into shape. That takes a lot of faith to believe in that. All right? Now watch. All right? The mineral degradation from the heat generated from large sun mirrors is another one. So we get these large sun mirrors, and we're shining it on the stone, and the mirror acting, I guess, like a laser or whatever. All right? Now watch. All right? Even extraterrestrial intervention is believed. Now, I'm going to tell you that extra-dimensional intervention is the reason that when those 200 fallen watcher angels came down to Mount Hermon, they gave information to men that wasn't available to mankind, nor did God intend for mankind to have that information. And we get this out of books like Enoch and Jasher and the Book of Giants and so forth and so on. But I believe that's where this knowledge came from. Okay, so when they say aliens did it, if they'll agree with me that aliens mean fallen angels, then we can agree. Now, if you're talking about green Martians from Mars, I can't get there with you. All right? Now, an extensive investigation of the Sacsayhuaman site in Peru reviewing many possible methods of transporting the 25 to 200 ton stones that have concluded that lighter stones were dragged over carefully prepared natural soil beds, while the heavier stones were transported on timber sleds. Now, 200 ton stones on timber sleds. Now, guys, you don't have to be an engineer to figure out that's not going to work. And even if that were true and you could drag that for 10 miles, well, how did you elevate it? How'd you get it up to the second, third, and fourth levels? Like, that's a question we need to be asking. All right? Now, model testing on various roadbed constructions resulted in the estimation that the heaviest stones could have been moved by no more than 1,000 men. Now, think about what 1,000 men is. You know, how many people go to Wedstrong? By the way, we were supposed to announce that, but how many people go to that? It's how many couples?
Well, there's 300-something folks, 157 couples usually.
So 300 people. So take Wedstrong, times it by 3. We wrap a rope around this and say, all right, everybody grab a rope. I mean, you see how stupid it sounds when you say it like that? That, hey, we're all going to take 1,000 of us. Well, we'll get 500 dragging it, and we'll get 500 pushing it. That just doesn't make any common sense, okay? Now, this is a temple of Jupiter at Baalbek in Lebanon, okay? This would have been, the building you're seeing on your right would have been this building here. This is obviously a drawing of what they had saw at one time. But it's over in Lebanon, and it's called Baalbek. Right? Notice the word B-A-A-L, Baalbek. It ties in with your God of the Old Testament, Baal. Now, here is a stone in Baalbek that archaeologists cannot figure out. Okay, this one stone that has already been quarried, carved at 90-degree angles, and sediment has filled up around. That is a man standing on the top of it. Okay, here's another picture of it. This is one stone left in the quarry undressed, yet it is a great, perfect rectangular. This picture is of the largest work stone on earth. Some have estimated it at 2,000 tons or 4 million pounds. This is a woman standing in front of it. So we have 4 million pounds, 2,000 tons. Now I want you to keep that number in the back of your head. This is a gantry crane, the largest in the world. This crane that I'm showing you on your left is the heaviest lifting crane known to man to this day. Okay? This gantry crane has the capacity of 20,000 tons or 44 million pounds. So this crane would lift that stone no problem. Okay? This here is a ring crane. This is the second largest crane in the world, and it goes way down in capacity. It goes to 5,000 tons or 10 million pounds. But here's the issue. Both of these cranes are stuck in one spot. It's called a ring crane because it has tracks going around, and all it can do is basically turn in a circle. Pick it up here, turn around, put it down there. This gantry train works on tracks and moves up and down this dock area and picks up parts of ships and ships like that. And both of these cranes have the capacity to lift up this stone, but they're not movable. You couldn't take these cranes into a quarry and go, hey, I need you to cut that stone out and then pick it up, and I need you to move it over here to the site and stand it up. They don't have that ability. What you would need then is this telescopic crane. And the one in the picture here is the world's largest, most capacity telescopic crane known to man. And it picks up 2.6 million pounds or 1,200 tons. Now, if you remember what we said, this thing is 2,000 tons. That crane only does 1,200. It's 4 million pounds. This thing is 2.6 million. So right now, with all of our technology, all of our advancements, we still couldn't, if we wanted to, go, you know what, let's go over there and help those guys out and pick that thing up and move it into place. We can't do it. So how are you going to move it? And they obviously have moved it before because it's been sculptured or quarried on all the sides. Which means at some point, some group of people, whether man or interdimensional or Nephilim, have decided to do that. Okay? Here is the same area in Baalbek, and look at the size of these quarried stones that have been set inside here, and here are the people up on top of there. Any clue on how this happens? Now, here's one of the problems I have with Christianity as a whole, because most churches are like, oh, you shouldn't even have to worry about that. Just focus on Jesus, okay? That's cool, and we want to focus on Jesus. But it makes Christians very ignorant that we act like we don't even see the world around us. And shouldn't we ask questions? Because remember, we're supposed to be the ones that have a standard of truth that holds us anchored into a belief system. Which means now that I'm anchored into this book, I should be able to launch out and ask questions. And this stuff is in the very world you live in. Okay, so if the Bible's true, and it is, and the story of God for mankind is through this book, how do we explain the world that we're in? Like, we should be able to go, well, wait a minute, we're supposed to be the guys with the answers because we happen to know the guy that did it all. Right? So for us, we need to be able to look at this stuff and go, wait a minute, what's going on here? Now, I'm going to tell you that Genesis 6 produced some individuals on this earth, known as the Nephilim, who were able, remember when I showed you that chart and some of these dudes were like 36 feet tall? And CJ did the math on what according to what a grasshopper is to a man, you're talking 300 and 400 feet tall? And you're going, I just can't believe that. Well, then what would you believe? Because it's in the Bible. So he either flowered it up saying, oh, they just overspoke. They weren't actually grasshoppers in their sights. Amos, when he says that those guys were like the cedars of Lebanon, yeah, he was just exaggerating a little bit. No. They're telling you that. Now, let me ask you something. The difference between the strength of me at 6'2" and Tate at 2'1" or whatever he is, I have no idea how tall he is. I mean, he's 30 inches, I guess. But anyway, Obviously, the bigger the individual, the more strength. Now, imagine something 36 foot tall. How massive that individual would be. But it's not just a sheer mass that they were able to do, but because these interdimensional beings came to this planet having knowledge about stuff that we don't necessarily have, they able to have technology to move stuff, and you're going to be blown away on how. All right, now, so you see these little guys standing around over here, and then there's set of steps right here. Who are these steps made for? You ever wonder? Well, Corey, they just carved those in there just, to have a seating area. A seating area? The steps are at least 12 foot tall. And if you're going to carve all that, then you got these little steps up next to it. Doesn't make any sense, does it? You just got to ask the question. All right. It's Coral Castle, Florida. This is down right by Homestead, Florida, if you've ever been down there. Miami-Dade County. Kind of in the news here lately. But anyway, there was a guy named Edward Leedskalnin, that's it, Leedskalnin. He is from Latvia. And what happened was he met his little, wife and got engaged and love of his life, and she realized you're poor, you're never going to amount to anything, and so she cancels it. So he moves here to Florida and decides, you know what, I'm going to really impress her. And he goes and builds a castle that you can go to this day, and we're talking about he built it in the 1900s, and what I mean by that, about 1930 something. Now check this out, okay? Now notice this open air castle and all these coral stones that are very sharp edges that have been carved. You got a ring of Saturn here, you got this crescent moon, you got all kinds of, he's got a seating area right here. The construction of Coral Castle remains one of Florida's greatest mysteries. Legend has it that it was sculpted by one man, Edward Leedskalnin. All right, there we go. Maybe I'll get his name figured out by the end of the week. All right, in the early 1900s, but many find it unbelievable that this 100-pound man who stood just a hair over 5 feet was able to move, carve, and manipulate more than 1,100 tons of stony coral, almost 1 million tons. One dude with no equipment. And we're not talking about some ancient, megalith and, maybe ancient aliens did it and all that goofiness. No, this guy did this in America in the century that most of us were born. All right? Now, stony coral features razor-sharp edges that don't make for prime construction materials. Yet in southern Florida, thousands of tons of it were used to build this imitable castle. All right? But just how did he do it? Edward, that's better, claimed he was simply mastered the skills of those who built the pyramids. By others believed black magic was involved. Now, he's saying, no, I learned the secrets on how they built the pyramids. He was a Freemason and would have been involved in the history of how those guys thought and taught. And maybe he had learned some stuff. And many felt it was just magic or black magic. Now, you do understand that all technology to people at some point is magic. I mean, if you could get in a DeLorean with your iPhone and go back to 1955 to see Biff, what do you think he would think with your phone? He would think it's crazy, right? Like, oh, that's sorcery. But that's how all technology is when you don't understand it. And yet here he is. All right, so one night, however, 2 teenagers did happen to witness the construction, and they later told police that the rocks were levitating in midair like hydrogen balloons. And Edward also claimed to have used no mortar, yet no light can pass through where his stones meet. Same way as Sacsayhuaman. Now, They never had equipment in there. He only worked at night under the darkness of light with a lantern so that nobody else could figure it out. All right, now watch this. He also came from a family of Latvian stonemasons, and he incorporated many Masonic symbols throughout Coral Castle. Many believe that the occultist Masonic practice offered that only explanation for the castle created, and the nosy neighbors said that they heard him repeating, watch this, incantations over the stones. This is how some came to believe that he used magic to craft the Coral Castle. In other words, they can hear him at night doing mantras over the stones. In other words, mantras or incantations were obviously, for a lack of better terms, he's casting a spell, if you will, over these stones. Okay? Now, Edward was known to have many sounds and frequency types of equipment in his property. That comes into play. Because here's this guy, all he's known for is building this castle by himself in 20 years, having all these cuts and configurations and moving over 1 million pounds of stone all by himself. And yet the one other thing he's really into is sound equipment and frequency equipment. In other words, how to generate frequencies and sonic sounds. Okay, now, here is a door that he created that is like 9 tons. And when he created it, it worked off of a spindle, and you literally could go up with one finger and push it, and it would spin. 9 tons. Or in other words, about 4.5 Corollas. All right, now, this is a 9-ton gate that can move with a simple touch. When this massive gate broke in modern years, it took several men and a crane to fix it. Yet he installed it and built it perfectly balanced without any of that. Now, I'm just throwing out some facts to you tonight to ask you. Now, some of you may be bored out of your mind thinking, who cares? Okay, well, you know. Well, first of all, I care, right? And since I'm the one doing the teaching, this is what we're doing, right? Now, but anyway, my point is, you might want to look into this and say, hey, how are they doing this? Is this demonic beings that are helping him do that? Or, you know, is there some scientific way? One of the things I can't stand about Christianity is when we act like science is not a part of what we do. Well, that's what the world does. They do science. We just do faith. I disagree that the two are separated. I think they are fully integrated, and I think that because the science and the laws of science were created by the very God you and I serve. Okay? And so there should be explanations that we should be able to explain these things. Now, hang on. We're going somewhere. Here are the pyramids, right? We've already talked about them a few weeks ago, but we're going to get into them a little bit more. The Great Pyramid, so the one at Giza, the big one, we're just going to talk about that tonight. The Great Pyramid is made up of 2.3 million stones, each weighing 2.5 tons or more. Okay, I want you to kind of file that number back. 2.3 million stones, each weighing 2.5 million tons. Each of the Great Pyramid stones are 1 meter by 1 meter by 2.5 meters, and they each weigh 2.5 tons. That's equivalent to a small SUV, or 2.3 million SUVs stacked up to make this pyramid. 2.3 million, or in other words, 285. All right? Now, the stones for the king's chamber weighed, now pay attention, the king's chamber, which is elevated about 350 meters off the ground. The stones that were granite inside there that made that, inside that pyramid, weigh anywhere from 25 to 80 tons, okay? So that's 25 times 2,000, that gives you the pounds, okay? Now, 25 to 80 tons and were brought roughly 500 miles to the site of the pyramids. In other words, where they quarried those was 500 miles away. Now you're talking, that's like going up to St. Louis and digging out or carving out the stone, dragging it back here to Kelly Harbin. And once we get this, and I'm taking the small number here, some of them are 80 tons. We'll take the 25 tons, and lifting it in the air 350 meters, or feet, excuse me, I think it's feet. Foot, 350 foot. Now, that's equivalent to 35 stories in the air. Now, none of that makes you go, huh. Now you see why the average person thinks aliens did it? Because there is no human reasoning on how they did it. And you were taught that every generation before us was less advanced and all of mankind was really primitive. And what I'd argue is that before the flood of Genesis, the world was so advanced it would make this place look primitive. They understood things about where we live and how we live far greater than you and I do. Okay? Hang on. So, an estimated of the number of materials used are 5 million tons. So that's 5 million times 2,000 gives you the weight of it, of limestone, and 8,000 tons, that's 8,000 times 2,000, of granite. And they had to be lifted up, some of them 350 feet in the air. Now, according to conventional beliefs, the pyramids were built by tens of thousands of workers who hauled massive blocks up ramps. However, according to engineer Peter James, this would have been impossible. Under the current theory, to lay the 2 million stone blocks required, watch this, the Egyptians would have had to lay a large block once every 3 minutes along these ramps. Remember, there's 2.3 million stones. And to build that thing in about 20 years, you would have had to lay a stone that weighs like an SUV one every 3 minutes. How many dudes do you got on this job site? And if you understand, if you've ever been on a job site, we move around awnings that sometimes are massive. When you think awnings, you're probably thinking of somebody's back porch with the fabric. That's not us. We're building big, massive structures. And many a times, we have to pick them up off the trailer, walk them into certain areas. And at certain points, there's too many guys. Like, you can't get enough guys around the thing. Like, I got a corner here lately. We're remodeling our house, I guess. My wife has decided, you know what? We're repainting the whole house. Hey, while we're at it, we're redoing the floors. We've done it all. So we've had to move furniture back and forth for about 2 weeks. I built a kitchen table in our house that weighs about 1,800 pounds. I did this a few years ago, and it's been sitting there. Well, then the other day we had to move it. Well, it's only, the base of it's only about 3 foot by 4 foot. And if we said, well, let's get about 10 guys. Well, the problem is you can't fit 10 guys around it. So if you're laying a stone every 3 minutes, how are you fitting all the dudes? It doesn't make any sense. Now, here's my better part. Watch this, okay? Now, under they would have had to do it, said Peter James, who had been studying the construction of the pyramids for more than 20 years. He also maintained that the ramps, watch this, would have had to be at least 1/4 mile long at the right angle for the blocks to be taken to such great heights. So in other words, you got your pyramid, and in order to get that stone up that ramp, that ramp has to be 1/4 mile long and 350 feet tall. That's more impressive than the pyramid. Like, understand where this church is, and you go down to about the stop sign down here towards the airport. That's about 1/4 mile. Now imagine building a ramp to get something on top of the church. hey guys, what we're going to need you to do is we're going to need you to go down there and start building a ramp this way. Okay? Now, here's the other thing that if you have any common sense about geometry, as that thing goes up and that ramp's here and we're going up a level, well, we got to raise the ramp. Okay, guys, now I need you to go a quarter mile that way and start building the ramp taller. Okay, once again, I'm being a little facetious on how I'm placing out this comments, but it's the point of trying to show you how dumb it is to believe the basic story they give you. Oh yeah, they had a bunch of slaves and they did all this to bury somebody in it. Okay, now, this is Stonehenge, and I'll talk more about this hopefully next week. But Stonehenge is an unexplainable thing because most of these megaliths and monoliths tie into the solstice, okay, where the sun lands and so forth and so on. But one of the things about this thing is it's tied into sound in such a way that sound is amplified and de-amplified depending on where you stand around that thing. In other words, and it's not even in its full system anymore, but there are times that you can stand at a certain spot and you can hear everything, and then you can go to another spot and it's deafening and you can't hear anything. Have you guys ever been to the nation's capital? There's an area in Washington, D.C., and you go into the Capitol. It's in the old part where they used to meet before they built the bigger section, and you can speak right here and they can hear you over there. Right? If you ever go to New York into Grand Central Station, that does the same thing. You get into the corner of it, and the way it's shaped, you speak, and the sound travels in such a way you can literally whisper with all those people talking in Grand Central. You stand into this corner and whisper, and she can be on the other side of the room and hear what I'm whispering, all through that sound. All right? Now, one of the existing theories the building of the pyramids and other megalith monuments is that sonic levitation was used, which means instruments that could levitate heavy objects and make them easier to move. So in other words, we elevate or levitate something via sound. Right? Now, hang on, because I'm going to bring this to your Bible. And for those of you that are bored, I'm going to help you with it. Okay? Now, more recent stories include techniques that are used in some areas in Tibet where with the help of drums and trumpets, they can levitate large stones on the slopes of mountains and move them wherever is needed for the building walls. Dr. Jalar has provided a detailed description and a drawing of this process. Now, hang on, I'll come back to that. No, let me finish that. All right, so we've got Abdul, this Muslim guy, okay? This Arab historian has written about Egypt, and he mentioned that the way the Egyptians used to move stones, referring to magic papyrus that was placed under the stone. So we've got basically like their form of paper underneath these stones, and they call it magic. Now, hang with me, all right? That was placed under the stone, and the stone was struck with a metal rod, causing the stone to levitate along an area or a paved with stones. In other words, it's either a paved area under it. We put this certain paper under it. We strike the stone with this certain metal, and the frequency or the resonancy would lift the stone up, and they could push it along, almost like, for a lack of better terms, what do they call it? A maglev train. You guys have ever heard of these maglev trains, these super fast trains? They work off of magnets where the train doesn't actually sit metal to metal. It has a space in between it. And so this guy studying it believed this is what they were doing. And he said what was done is down this path of stones was a fenced path of metal poles. So you got these metal poles going down through there to keep the frequency going on both sides of the path. This sound like metal poles used to vibrate, creating frequencies in such a way that they would create a moving path for the stone. Okay. Now, a similar process was suggested to have been used for the building of Coral Castle in the U.S. under controversial and relatively recent events. The Coral Castle is a stone structure that was built by this Edward dude, who said that he had discovered the technique that the Egyptians used to build the pyramids, the technique related to levitation and anti-gravity technology. Now, he never revealed his secret. It took him 28 years to build the castle from about 1923 to 1951 and refused to allow anyone to view him while he worked. He did the castle completely on his own, carving more than 1,000 tons of rock. Although nobody ever heard the sound of him building, if he used sonic levitation, it doesn't mean that the sonic levitation method used sound waves audible to humans. In other words, if you said, well, wait a minute, they would have heard the sound waves. Wait until we bring in the science experiment. The other day, we're messing around on a Sunday and with this new little machine I've got, and we're cranking the hertz and the audible or amplifications up, and there was a certain time we couldn't hear it. But guess who was freaking out in our house? The cats, because they were like hearing stuff because it wasn't audible to you and I. So when you say, well, no, people would hear that sound, remember, when you elevate something with sound, it's not about just throwing a lot of sound at it. It's about finding a certain frequency that lifts it. Okay? Now hang with me. Now, let's just play you this real quick and see how you like that.
Hey, it's me, Dustin. Welcome back to Smarter Every Day. I'm in Chicago. Anthony picked me up in his awesome Mustang.
Oh, please.
And told me to come to this building because we're going to film acoustic levitation. What is this?
This is an acoustic levitator. It's single axis, which means that we only control things on one axis here. So we have two horns or transducers.
Anytime I see an oscilloscope, I get excited. So am I going to hear it on the camera?
So the main frequency we're using, again, is 22 kilohertz, which is higher than human hearing. But what you'll be hearing, the subharmonic, around 17, 18 kilohertz.
But I can just put a low-pass filter on the audio. And
I'm guessing that you cut it out, yeah.
Okay.
Turn it up, and on the oscilloscope, you'll see the two waves from each of the two horns.
Well, let's think and levitate something, dude. So that's just a styrofoam ball.
Styrofoam ball, and the spoon has all those slots in it, so the sound passes right through it.
No way.
And then I can just...
And by sound, you mean pressure?
Yeah, the sound waves, which are pressure waves. I mean, but you can see the wavelength spacing basically between these.
That's stinking awesome.
You may have seen sound drawn like this, but it's a bit too simplified. A real sound wave actually looks like this. The bright parts are the higher pressure and the darker parts are the low pressure. These ripples move along at the speed of sound. When you have two identical sound waves and you line them up just right, they no longer act like waves moving across the room. If you have a wave coming from this side and another wave coming from the other side, they become what's called a standing wave. You get a spot right here where there's a pressure flipping on and off, and a spot right here where the pressure isn't changing at all. There's no oscillation. If you flip this thing upright and then you put something tiny right inside that little pocket, you can use that air pressure to bump something up against the force of gravity. So it ends up looking like this ping pong paddle. The particle wants to drop, but it keeps getting knocked back up by the high pressure wave below it. And that is acoustic levitation. So if it works with foam, it should work with water, right? Anthony uses a syringe to balance little drops of water on top of that oscillating wave. Just like the ping pong ball, you can see it bouncing up and down. Look at the one on the bottom, bouncing up and down trying to find its spot. Another cool thing is the fact that if I make the water drops too big, they always seem to explode. Why would it do that? It happens just a little too fast to see with the naked eye. I flew home wishing I had some way of bringing together the acoustic levitation machine and a high-speed camera. 10 months went by. I had no way of doing this, but then I got a call from Ford. They were, hey, it's me, Des.
All right, so you can look at that later. I'm running out of time, but I'm showing you via sound. They're letting these balls levitate. They're doing it with water. Now you're going, wait a minute. You're talking 80-ton stones, okay? I'm not saying we've matched what they had technology in Genesis 6, but we're getting there, and we're understanding how certain things work as far as levitation. And basically what we're showing is it's possible. Now I want to give you a real story that happened in the 1900s in Tibet. Okay, and I want you to notice this. The Tibetan monks made rocks float. And when they made them float, we're not talking about little balls of water. We're talking big stones were elevated up. Now watch this, okay? Now, notice these big, long trumpets they have right here. And this is over in this Tibetan area. Now, a Jewish doctor, Dr. Giral, studied at Oxford. During those times, he became friends with a young Tibetan student. A couple of years later, it was 1939, and Dr. Giral had made his way to Egypt for an English scientific society. There was sent by a messenger of his Tibetan friend and urgently requested him to come to Tibet. After Dr. Giral got the leave, he followed the messenger and arrived after a long journey by plane and yak caravans. At the monastery where his friend, who was now holding a high position, were now living, Dr. Giral stayed there for some time, and because of his friendship with the Tibetans, he learned a lot of things that other foreigners had no chance to hear or to observe. One day, his friends took him to a place in the neighborhood of the monastery, and he showed him a sloping meadow was surrounded in the northwest by a high cliff. In one of the rock walls at the height of 250 meters, okay? Not 250 feet, 250 meters, or 200, for lack of better terms, 250 yards, 2.5 football fields in the air. Okay, now I want you to get that in your head. All right, was a big hole which looked like an entrance to a cave. So they're down in the valley here. They're looking up this cliff wall, and up about 2.5 football fields up is a hole in the side of this mountain. Now, in the front of this hole was a platform on which the monks were building a rock wall. So they've got this hole in the wall and a build out, and these monks who have lowered themselves down via rope are sitting up there on that platform. But these guys, the other monks with Dr. Giral, are down in the valley below. Now, the only access to the platform was the top of the cliff. The monks lowered themselves down by the help of rope in the middle of the meadow, about 250 meters from the cliff. Now, understand, I've spent all day going through the math, and I'm not trying to regurgitate all that. I'm just telling you the math matters. So it's 250 feet, 250 meters up. So they're 250 meters this way. All right? Now, from the cliff wall was a polished slab of rock with a bowl-like cavity center. So imagine a stone that's been polished, but it looks like a big salad bowl, if you will. Okay? Now, the bowl had a diameter of 1 meter and a depth of 15 centimeters. A block of stone was maneuvered into the cavity by a yak oxen. So they bring this big, massive stone, they stick it in this salad bowl, if you will. Okay, and here it is. It's 250 meters from the base of the cliff, and the platform's 250 meters up. The block of the 1 meter wide, the block that they're going to send up is 1 meter wide and 1.5 meters long. So imagine that block that they're going to send up is about like this, like this. We're talking pretty big here, guys. You know, most of us in here, most of you ain't going to be able to pick it up. All right, now, I'm going to see if you caught that. All right, now, then 19 musical instruments were set in an arc at 90 degrees at a distance of 63 meters from the stone slab. So we got this bowl out here. We're going to go 90 degrees around it, and what we're going to do is be 63 meters back from it, and we're going to have 19 instruments. Watch. All right, so the radius of 63 meters was measured out accurately. The music instruments consisted of 13 drums, 6 trumpets, 8 drums had a cross section of 1 meter and the length of 1 meter and 1.5 meters. 4 drums were medium sized with a cross section of 0.07 meters and the length of 1 meter. And the only small drum had a cross section of 0.02 meters and the length of 0.03 meters. And all the trumpets were of the same size. They had a length of 3.5 meters long. So in other words, those big, long trumpets I showed you at the beginning. All right. The big drums and all the trumpets were fixed on a mount which could be adjusted with staffs in the direction of the slab stone. And the big drums were made of 1 millimeter thick sheet iron and weighed about 150 kilograms. They were built in 5 sections, and all the drums were open at one end, while on the other end of the bottom was metal, on which the monks beat with a leather club. Behind each instrument was a row of monks. Okay, so you got these instruments, a row of monks. I'm trying to give you the picture. Hang on. When the stone was in the position, the monk behind the small drum gave a signal to the start of the concert. The small drum had a sharp sound and could be even heard with the other instruments making a terrible racket. All the monks were singing, chanting a prayer slowly, increasing the tempo with this unbelievable noise. During the first 4 minutes, nothing happened. Then, as the speed of the drumming and the noise increased, the big stone block started to rock and sway, and suddenly it took off into the air and with an increasing speed in the direction of the platform in the front of the cave hole, 250 meters high. After 3 minutes of ascent, it landed on the platform. So, got the choir behind them. The instruments are playing. They're shoving all this at a certain degree angle at this salad bowl with a big, massive salad bowl. But this big, massive rock begins to float up. Takes 3 minutes, and they land it on top of that platform. Right? Hang with me. So Dr. Drawell knew about the hurling of stones. Tibetan experts like so-and-so, Spalding Hawk, had spoken to about it, but they had never seen it. So Dr. Drawell, with the first foreigner who had the opportunity to see a remarkable spectacle, because he had the opinion in the beginning that he was being the victim of a mass psychosis, he made 2 films of the incident. The films showed exactly the same thing that he had witnessed. The English society for which Dr. Drawell was working confiscated the 2 films and declared them classified. This action is rather hard to explain or understand. So here's a diagram that he laid out. So this is a top view of it. Here's your salad bowl, your 90-degree angle, all your instruments and your choir, and it's all coming here. And this would have been the platform 350 feet up. This is a side angle or elevation of it. Here's where they're singing towards it, and it goes up on top of there. Now, here's another diagram of the way this drum was working up here and how they were doing these drums here. And all these guys are singing, and it all comes here, and the rock goes up, right? Now, I need to ask you, how many do you think this is a little far-fetched to believe? Now, you don't have to answer out loud because I'm going to embarrass you. Now, come on, Bible believer. You know, we stand up in church and tell some outlandish Bible stories. How about this one? So, Jericho had these massive walls, and God says, here's how I want you to drop them. How do you do it? With sound. Do you know what was in Jericho? You know who built Jericho? The Nephilim. You know how those walls would have been made? By the Nephilim using sound to elevate those walls. Now, why did God choose to use sound to drop them? To show them, I'm in charge. I took what you built, the way you built it, and I dropped them. And how did he do it? By sending a bunch of people around with ram's horns shouting. Now, it's interesting that we will listen to these Tibetan stories and go, oh, that's crazy. That's far-fetched. That's just, mythology, Corey. I just stick with the Bible. Really? Because the Bible is more far-fetched than any other book out there. You ever get into the Urim and Thummim and try to figure out what that thing is? You ever get into the fact that the ark, if you touch it, you're dead? Like, there's a lot of stuff that, wow, if we really look into the scientific thing going on here, and then all of a sudden you read your Bible and go, that makes sense. The walls of Jericho is not some cute little story to just tell the Awana kids. The problem is, as adults, we don't give God the benefit of the doubt and say, okay, now God, how did you do that? I believe you did it, but how did you do it? Okay? Now, look at this stone here. This stone here is called the gate the gate of the sun. Okay? Now, this is one piece of stone that is carved into a gate. This is the back side of that stone. Notice the 90-degree windows cut into it, but they're not all the way through. Now it's been cracked, but I want you to notice this. The gate of the sun is in Bolivia at the altitude of 12,594 feet. Do you know how high Breckenridge is? Right, but where we normally ski is almost equal to that. Okay? To give you an idea of where Breckenridge is, and this Bolivia. It's in an ancient city called Tiwanaku. All right? It is in this gate is measuring 9 foot 8 wide, or 9.8 foot wide, and tall, and 13 foot wide. This gigantic carved arch into one single block of volcanic stone. One block made that whole thing. Okay, it's estimated to weigh 10 tons or 20,000 pounds. It is viewed today. It can be viewed today where it was found in the early 1900s, although it is believed that it is not in its original location, which remains uncertain. How did they get it there? All right, now, Pumapunka, on the same area that we're describing in Bolivia. Look at these cuts on the stone. We just now can do this with lasers. Now, how were they doing it? Now, watch. Here, look at all the detail. It's hard probably for you guys to see online or even you in the class, but you can go on and look up Pumapunka and see this. Here is a 100, this is drilled. Now, I don't know how many of you guys drill concrete today. This is stone. But man, we did that job in North Carolina, but bought brand new bits. And by the time the job was over, throw the bits in the trash. Because of how many holes we were drilling, and it was just, and that's concrete. That's not granite. And they got perfectly drilled out holes. How'd they do it? Now, here's some more of it. Pumapunka, carved out. Look at this. Perfectly laid out. A few years ago, sonic drilling, now sonic drilling is sound drilling. Drilling with sound. Right? We do all kinds of things with sound that you don't realize. Some of you women, when you got pregnant, you went to the doctor and got you a ultrasound, which is how they saw the kid in there moving around by bouncing sound waves off that kid. All right? Now there's all kinds of talk on what that does, what it doesn't do. I'm not here for that. I'm just showing you. All right? So a few years ago, the sonic drilling was just demonstrated by NASA as a means to be used for mining materials through rocks. So in other words, instead of running the drill bit, you run sound waves through it and it drills it. Now, is there a chance that they could have done that? Now, I know we've spent an hour in here and you're going, oh my goodness. You've taken us through all this to just what? Take us to one verse in the Bible? In Jericho, walls coming down? Listen, I'm setting the stage to where we're going, because here's what I want you to understand, because I'm out of time, but I want you to understand that whether it's sonic levitation or whether it's sonic drilling, it all comes down to acoustic fields, particles, and frequencies. Because that matters. And when we get into this a little bit further, we're going to pull out Deuteronomy 22:8, where God said it was a sin for you to mix cottons and linens, and you're going, that's a little strange, God. Out of all the stuff that we could do wrong as mankind, don't mix your linens and cottons. It's a sin. Okay? And here I am standing in front of you with a dry fit shirt. Right? Now, I will explain how that all works out, but understand we're getting into a world of science that maybe some verses in Scripture will start to make more sense to you, like maybe like the walls of Jericho after tonight. So, all right, I am sonic drilling using high frequency vibration and resonance. All right, there we go. We're through it tonight, and I'll pick it up next week.